Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Chu. I'm a professor of psychology here at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. This is the second in a series of 5 videos on how to study effectively in college. In the first video, we examined some basic beliefs that can undermine your learning. In this video, I'll explain some basic principles of how people learn and how you can use those principles to improve the effectiveness of your study. Let's start by examining how accurate your understanding is of how people learn. Take a look at the following statements. Pick the one that represents the most important factor in successful learning. Only one is correct. In order to find out the correct one, I want you to imagine you're in a classic psychology experiment by Thomas Hyde and James Jenkins from 1969. See if you can guess the results. The basic design of their study is shown here with 5 different groups of participants. Each group of participants was presented with a list of 24 words. The instructions the participants were given about what to do with the words varied from group to group. Once all the words were presented, everyone had to try to recall them from memory. Hyde and Jenkins looked at the impact of 2 variables on learning. The first one, on the left, is whether or not you knew you were going to have to recall the words after all of them were presented. If you're in one of the 2 groups in the intentional condition, you were forewarned that you would have to recall the words after they were all presented. If you were in one of the 2 groups in the incidental condition, you weren't forewarned about the recall test. It's like taking a surprise pop quiz. Any learning that occurred was incidental. The other variable Hyde and Jenkins looked at was how participants rehearsed or encoded the words, what became known later as level of processing. 2 groups had to listen to the words and check whether or not it had the letter E in the spelling. The other 2 groups had to rate whether or not they found the word pleasant. Now, why would this make a difference? If you're checking for E's, then you're focusing on the spelling of the word, which is called shallow level of processing. If you're rating its pleasantness, you're thinking about the meaning of the words related to your own experience. That's called deep level processing. So, say the word on the list is dance. If you're in the intentional condition, you knew that you'll be asked later to recall it. If you're in the incidental condition, you haven't a clue about the recall test. In the other variable, if you're in the E-checking group, you think about the spelling and mark down yes. If you're in the pleasantness group, you think about dance, you check yes if you like dance and no if you don't. The 2 variables combined to give you 4 different groups. There was a 5th group just told to memorize the words as best they could. So the list of 24 words was presented 1 word at a time, and each group carried out its instructions. Afterward, all the participants were asked to recall as many of the 24 words as they could. Who do you think recalled the most words? Let's look at the results and see what happened and see what it says about learning. The average percent recall is shown on the y-axis. First, did the intent to learn matter? If it did, then the intentional learning groups should do better than the incidental learning groups. But they did not. Intent to learn had no effect at all. Now, look at level of processing. If level of processing matters, then deep processing, rating pleasantness, should recall more than shallow processing, checking for ease. You see that deep processing groups recalled a lot more than the shallow processing groups, regardless of whether they were intending to learn or not. Now, there are 2 key points here. First, people who use deep processing learn the material, whether they intended to or not. On the other hand, if people use shallow strategies, even if they wanted to learn, they did not learn. Second, people who process words at a deep level, even if they weren't trying to learn, remembered them just as well as that control group who were just doing their best to learn. So the depth of processing matters, and the intention to learn doesn't. You can have every intention to learn, but if you use a shallow strategy, you won't learn. Let me say a little bit more about levels of processing, because it's a powerful idea for student learning. Levels of processing says that memory is composed of a continuum of levels from shallow to deep. Shallow levels involve studying meaningless, superficial properties of what you're trying to learn, like mindless rereading or memorization. The deepest levels of processing involve thinking about material meaningfully, interpreting the information, and relating it to your prior knowledge or experience, or creating a mental image of the information. Deeper processing leads to better recall. You also have to understand the idea of orienting tasks. An orienting task makes people process information at a certain level of processing. Orienting tasks make people process information at a certain depth. In this case, checking for ease is a shallow orienting task, making people process words at a shallow level. Rating a word's pleasantness is a deep orienting task, causing people to think about the meaning of the words, process them deeply, and thus learn the words. Now let's return to the question of the single most important factor in learning. We can rule out number 1 because we just saw that intention and desire to learn are not important. Number 2 is also not correct. In the study, both groups paid close attention to the words to do their orienting tasks. Attention is not enough to guarantee learning. What about number 3? You hear a lot about learning styles. Some people are visual learners, others are auditory or kinesthetic learners. There's simply no good research evidence that supports the validity of learning styles, so forget about them. Besides, if you plan to be successful, you should become good at learning in multiple ways. What about number 4? I did make a big deal about committing enough time to be successful, but time alone is not sufficient for successful learning. That leaves number 5, which is correct. It relates to depth of processing. If you read a text without comprehension, or if you memorize definitions without really understanding them, you're using shallow processing and you will not learn. If you think about meaningful connections, you're using deep processing and you'll learn whether you intend to or not. If you picked incorrectly, don't feel bad. Most people get this wrong. If you pick correctly, congratulations, you're on the right path to successful study. So, let's summarize what we've learned in the first 2 videos. Here are the factors which don't help or even hurt your learning. Now, I'm not saying that desire to learn, attention, or engagement are bad things, but deep processing is the crucial element. A lot of students want to learn, but they use shallow strategies, and they don't learn. Now, here are the factors which do contribute to your academic success. So how do we go about processing information deeply and developing a connected understanding of material? That's the focus of the next 2 videos.